I know you're watching, so turn up the volume. New York City's new mayor takes aim at the president during his victory speech. Not only was Zoran Mamdani a political outsider ahead of the mayoral race, he flourished during a particularly nasty smear campaign. What does his win mean for Democrats and Republicans alike? You're watching Counterpoints with me, Melinda Newsweek. The youngest in more than a century, the first Muslim and the first of South Asian descent. New York City Mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani made a lot of history on Tuesday night. What's harder to quantify about this particular mayoral race, however, is if we've ever seen one quite so ugly. The smear campaigns and personal attacks were relentless and often came directly from the White House. And yet, Mamdani managed to turn it all into points of pride.
The conventional wisdom would tell you that I am far from the perfect candidate. I am young, despite my best efforts to grow older. I am Muslim. I am a democratic socialist. And most damning of all, I refuse to apologize for any of this.
In reality, the office of mayor has limited power, and yet Mamdani's victory is being talked about as if it could reshape American politics. Some analysts argue it was a litmus test for President Trump and MAGA politics, and both were found wanting. Others say it could forge a new path for the Democrats. Coming up on Counterpoints, we'll ask how Zoran Mamdani overcame these negative campaigns and won. If the mayoral race was in part a referendum on President Trump, and can one man really revive the flagging fortunes of the left? Joining the discussion is Josh Hammer, Senior Editor-at-Large of Newsweek and host of The Josh Hammer Show. Stephen Bonnell is back with us, a YouTuber and political commentator, also known online as Destiny. And rounding out our panel is Amani Al-Khatahtbeh, an author, activist and founder of MuslimGirl.com. Thanks for joining us here on Counterpoints. The election of Zoran Mamdani as mayor of New York City has gained huge attention, and not just in the US, internationally as well. And part of that has to do with just how divisive and at times nasty this campaign was. Some of the commentary throughout the race framed Mamdani as a terrorist and a radical threat. He himself called it at times Islamophobic. Issues far from New York City, such as the Israel-Hamas war, were pulled into the conversation. But by and large, Mamdani stuck to his messaging on primarily the cost of living crisis and the rental market. Josh, let's start with you, because I know that you're not a Mamdani fan. Josh, why do you think he won? Despite this negative campaign that was run against him, how did he turn it around?
Well, look, I mean, Zoran Mamdani is the Democratic nominee, or he was a Democratic nominee for mayor in a city where roughly 66% of registered voters are Democrats. So one might make an argument that the mayoral race really was won in the Democratic primary. And part of the issue back then was that there was a fractured field. Andrew Cuomo, for what it's worth, even going back to the Democratic primary, and Cuomo both in the primary and in the general was Mamdani's leading opponent. Cuomo ran what can best at best, let's call it kind of a mediocre campaign, a deeply uninspired campaign. This is someone who was a former governor of New York. His father, Mario Cuomo, was a governor back decades ago. He was attempting this later in life political comeback. His heart, frankly, never really seemed to be in it. He never came to terms with his handling of the COVID-19 crisis, never apologized for the whole nursing home scandal. So he ran a really awful campaign in both the primary and the general. The other element here is that Zoran Mamdani was backed by the DSA, by the Democratic Socialists of America, who have, for better or for worse, I would argue for worse as a conservative, but the DSA has a phenomenal turnout machine in terms of actually getting their activists to the polls, and that's very much what they did in New York City. There's a lot of number crunching that can be said about that as well. If you look at where Zoran Mamdani actually got his supporters, including on election day itself, a lot of them came from religiously unaffiliated voters, recent folks who moved to New York City in the past 5 years. He wins a shockingly high percentage of folks who just moved to New York City in the past 5 years. By contrast, you look at folks who are born in New York City, been there for decades. They actually, Cuomo actually got their support there. So you can start to see really how he carried this coalition. In some ways, it kind of superficially resembles the 2008 Barack Obama coalition, but he won. He won fair and square.
Amani, was it sealed in the primary? Is it just that Cuomo lost it rather than Mamdani won it?
I think Zohran Mamdani really won and earned every single vote that was cast for him. I think the difference is very obvious with the discrepancy in the polling numbers, but truly, I mean, we've seen the largest voter turnout in New York since the past 60 years. And he's the first mayoral candidate in 60 years to get over 1 million votes. So he surely led a platform that inspired people. And a study just came out this morning that actually one of the main policy positions that made him so tremendously popular was his position on Israel and Palestine. It was because of the fact that he is a public figure that is not afraid to say that our country, our states want to abide by international law. And this reflects the majority opinion of the majority of the American public right now. So it is no surprise whatsoever that he was able to inspire newcomers to come out to the polls, families, community members, that some who have never even voted before, to come out and vote for him because they finally heard something new, something that represents them. And not only did it inspire people locally to support him, but also, as you said, across the entire country. I wouldn't be surprised if this inspired a new wave, a new generation of new Democratic leaders that want to step up and want to take leadership on. And we've also seen it resonate globally as well. You know, last night, all throughout for us, it was nighttime, but all around the world, the news of Mamdani's win echoed and people were out celebrating it. And so I think that truly is a marker that this is a new chapter that the public is demanding us to enter.
We're going to come into a breakdown on what it means for Republicans, what it means for the Democrats as we move on in the debate. So I'm going to pick up on those points a little bit later on. But Stephen, let me bring you in. What do you make of Amani's comments there? In particular, do you think he was boosted by his very outspoken stance with regard to the Israel-Hamas conflict?
I feel like everybody's over-indexing on the parts of his election that they feel the strongest about. So people on the very far left think that it's because of his position on Israel-Palestine. And I'm sure that energized, especially younger voters, you know, a bit more. People on the right are attacking him for all sorts of crazy reasons that I don't think are very relevant to why he's winning. Him being a socialist or communist or a radical Islamic jihadist that, you know, I've heard. I feel like my analysis is a lot more crude or boring. Like, I look at the two campaigns, I feel like Cuomo's was relatively uninspired. I'm probably quite a bit to the right of Mamdani when it comes to economics. There's a lot of his policy that I don't really like, but I thought his ads were really funny. Like, it almost felt like I was watching like a guest star on The Daily Show. He seems like a funny dude. I like listening to all of his speeches. He seems like he's been pretty above board with all of his campaign stuff, whereas the attacks against him, I felt, have been pretty unhinged from Cuomo and from the Republican establishment at large. And I mean, New York City is a pretty left-leaning voting population. So once he secured the primary, I feel like it was pretty unlikely that he was going to lose in the general. So yeah, that's just how I view it. I think he ran a good campaign. I think he deserved to win.
I would have to really push back on that. You know, I don't think that it really is over-indexing when every single interview, every single debate stage that Zohran went on, he was compelled to make a comment on Gaza and Israel. In fact, that was the number one thing even that mainstream media wanted to hear him speak on, even though he was running for mayor of New York City. And so he was really pushed to be vocal about his position on this issue. I would say that it even dominated the majority of the sound bites and the airwaves surrounding his campaign. And people liked what they heard. He represented, I mean, like I said, this really isn't, science over here. It's fact that this is what the majority of Americans want to see in terms of us abiding by international law, in terms of us ending our funding of a genocide, of us, starving the American people in order for us to drop bombs for another country on the other side of the world. These are all common sense issues, common sense positions that the majority of Americans feel right now, and feel strongly because of how badly our economy is hurting. So it makes perfect sense why Zohran became as popular as he did.
Josh, what do you think?
I mean, in nationwide polling, just real quick, in nationwide polling, like the Israel-Palestine conflict ranks is pretty low. I think it's like 6% of voters like rank it as a top 3 issue. I'm sure it's nice for people to hear it and they feel a certain type of way about it, but I don't think these are the primary drivers for why people were going out to vote. I think that it did dominate the airwaves because a lot of people like to talk about this particular issue, but I would say there's a failure of Cuomo more than anything else. At the end of the day, the New York City mayor is not really doing anything with regards to our stance on Israel-Palestine. He's not going to be able to influence, funding for Israel or, bringing an end to anything going on over there. So I don't see it being as relevant to the majority of New York voters. Again, maybe younger people, it's the thing that they like more about him. But absent this issue, I'm not sure if I feel like, younger voters, new transplants, or everybody else would have been like, oh, I think Cuomo is definitely our guy now. The Mamdani guy, if he's not talking about Israel-Palestine, that's not what I want in my mayor. I feel like his messaging was pretty big on other economic issues, tabletop issues, talking about the funding for the public transportation, stuff related to like rent control of the grocery stores. As much as I might disagree with it, like the big focus on cost of living is getting really expensive. We need to do something about it. And then making it this, like a fun message that was entertaining to watch and everything, I think was with the big drivers of his campaign.
Okay, let me bring in Josh. What's your take on that? Was he put in a position where he needed to justify perhaps his faith as a Muslim being asked about the Israel-Hamas conflict, or was it a ploy to get more voters out, or do you think that it wasn't an issue at all?
I think it was a side issue at best. This is an issue that the media was infatuated about for the very simple reason that the media is generally infatuated about all conflicts in the Middle East, especially one that involve Jews. There is a large Jewish population in New York City. It's the largest Jewish population of any city outside of the state of Israel across the world. So there were various reasons why the media was interested in sound bites on this, but this was an ancillary issue at best, I think, in this election. And again, we're still waiting on some more exit polling data there. But in an election like New York City, it really is those bread and butter economic issues, I think, that are top concerns. And he did talk about this a lot. He talked about economic issues a lot on the campaign trail. He talked about it arguably more than any slew of issues there. He talked about all kind of the entire slate of far left AOC style Democratic Socialist of America issues. He talked about defunding the police, but it seems to me like his basic socialist pitch on economics is really what carried the day. Again, I think a lot of folks are overinterpreting this, but New York City, to kind of give the number again, roughly 66% of registered voters in New York City are registered Democrats. It is a very blue city in a light blue state. And if you win the Democratic primary, you're going to be in good shape to win the general election. I think it's basically that simple. Just a quick response, though, to some of what I heard earlier. The notion that Zoran Mamdani's individual stances on the Israel-Hamas conflict, that this is something that the American people agree with or are clamoring for, I think is completely, utterly asinine. The overwhelming majority of American people do not agree with Zoran Mamdani's consistent, repeated refusal to condemn the clearly anti-Semitic expression to globalize the Intifada. The American people are not with him on that. The American people are not with him in talking about what has happened in Gaza the past few years as a genocide or apartheid. We have polling on this. So, sound bites are nice, kind of talking out of your rear end is nice, but we actually have polling on this. And the American people are consistently not with Mamdani on these issues, but a very left-leaning city like New York City, they're not necessarily going to come out in droves to oppose him on those issues. For what it's worth, Jewish New Yorkers actually voted against Mamdani at an even higher percentage than Catholic New Yorkers or Protestant New Yorkers. Mamdani actually lost literally all of those religious subgroups. Cuomo carried all three of those categories, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews alike. He just ends up dominating the religiously unaffiliated, who apparently are a plurality, or perhaps even a majority of New Yorkers these days.
Amani?
I mean, Josh, you probably know a lot about talking out of one's behind, but I do want to say that obviously mainstream media had a tremendous interest in Zohran's position on Israel and Palestine, because we all know that lobbyists have Congress on payroll. And one of the strongest lobbies in the country is paying for our representatives to sponsor this genocide
AIPAC is the 199th
that Israel is carrying out on our name. And
what are your thoughts on
genocide,
NYC, National Iranian Council?
and once again, genocide. This is an issue that has been deemed a genocide by virtually every global human rights organization in the world.
Do you want to go down the rabbit hole of genocide?
That this isn't an issue that's of
I'm
interest.
actually a lawyer. I actually know what genocide is.
We're not going to get too deep into that issue, because that's an issue for another day, whether or not, because we need to focus on the election itself.
And listen, and to respond to that, if I may complete my point, I mean, Josh's reaction is exactly why Cuomo lost. I mean, Josh represents an outdated political system. Cuomo's biggest failure was the fact that he thought he could rely on that establishment, on those established lobbyist ties, just like Josh thinks that the American public is still dumb enough to hear the talking points of these lobbyists and for us to actually believe them. That's not the case anymore. And I think this election reflects that. Cuomo's biggest failure was not only relying on relying on the establishment and his existing ties, but also on spurring anti-Muslim sentiment and weaponizing Zohran's religious identity against him. He, again, using the same playbook as the one that Josh is relying on right now heavily, he thought that he could really depend on racism, honestly, just racism, and people hating Muslims and hating Arabs and equating all Arabs with South Asians, with Zohran, with brown people, with an abstract enemy that perpetuated 9/11, that somehow this Indian Muslim with the Ugandan citizenship is somehow connected to, if you were listening to what mainstream media had to say. That was Cuomo's biggest failure, because New Yorkers said, we are done. We are done with that outdated playbook, and we are over the racism, the Islamophobia of the past, and it does not work on us anymore.
Stephen, what do you think? Is the idea of this negative campaign, this accusations of being a communist, an anti-Semite, anti-American, are people just sick of that kind of campaign, and that is why we saw Mamdani being able to show that he was different in that regard?
My take on this is very boring. I'm going back to what I said before. I think that he did really well on messaging on economic issues, and I think it was really entertaining to watch. I think it basically boils down to that. I think all these other conversations are a massive waste of time. I blame the Republican establishment for the past 3 decades, and especially MAGA, for reducing every single conversation to basically the dumbest possible talking point. And there are so many great criticisms that you can make relating to Mamdani's policies. I think that there are great arguments you can make against strict price controls and the distortionary impacts that they have on markets. I think that there are so many great things that you can say, like, should the mayor of New York say that he would arrest Netanyahu if he comes in? Like, that's kind of a weird statement. But instead, the conservatives are hyper fixated on, and I just want to say, somebody who spent a lot of time traveling in Europe, to come back and to see conservatives look at Mamdani and call this guy like a radical Muslim is just the most unbelievably stupid thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I almost wish he would show up with, 5 girlfriends and burqas and just start chanting Islamic prayers, just because of how unhinged the conservatives become over it. I just think it's ridiculous. And I wish that we could have more conversations, I guess, about the actual issues that are facing New Yorkers for the city of New York. Obviously, I don't even live in New York, so I don't even have a direct investment in that. But I think that a large part of our media diet now, and a large part of the media atmosphere, is just unhinged personal attacks. And I think the MAGA movement and the Republicans in general for the past several decades have played into that heavily. And that's why we're having conversations on if he's like a radical Islamist, or if he's a communist or a socialist, or whatever else, instead of discussing any policy oriented stuff. I think it's a huge disservice to all Americans.
All right, Josh, respond to that. The failings of maybe attacking the man, the player, and not the game.
Well, I mean, there's some truth in that. I mean, on the one hand, and on the other hand, I hate to say it, but there are many Americans, many people who vote in major elections, like the New York City mayoral election, who don't necessarily care for a highly wonkery public policy debate. I have learned this myself in any number of my public debates on debate stages as well. As oftentimes emotional appeal ends up carrying the day over facts, logic, reason, and so forth. I very much wish that were not the case, by the way, as someone who very much cares about public policy and law and logic and reason. I very much wish that carried the day. It doesn't often carry the day. I will just say this. I will say that the guy who, if you go back in the social media feed, has quite literally quoted Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, the guy who literally began his victory speech last night with a quotation from Eugene Debs, the five-time Socialist Party of America presidential candidate. It seems to me like it is not a particularly wild stretch to call that guy a socialist, communist, whatever you want to call him. I think a prior generation of Americans wouldn't have even batted an eyelash to recognize him as such. I don't personally think that he is a radical Islamist, for what it's worth. I don't think that he is a covert Muslim Brotherhood agent or anything like that. I do think that he has outrageous views on most Middle East geopolitical related issues, which really should not, again, be involved at all in a municipal election in New York City. It's completely and utterly irrelevant. So I wish that weren't a factor, because if I were a New Yorker, I would be outraged my conversation were taking place on this terrain and not my actual bread and butter economics, my NYPD funding, things that actually matter to my day-to-day life there. I totally agree with Destiny on all of that. But
how much of an issue do you think it is, Josh, that the one of the richest, most iconic, influential cities, the heart of capitalism in the US, is now going to have a socialist mayor?
Yeah, I think it's horrific. I think it's an absolute abomination. I mean, as someone who grew up in the broader New York City area, I grew up in the suburbs there. Most of my family still lives in the broader area. I personally left when I was 18 years old and never looked back. I'm not a big fan of New York, but I think it's a total mess, because New York is the largest, most important city in America still to this day. And it's really the largest, it's really the most important city in the Western world still to this day when it comes to finances, when it comes to the arts, to culture, to high fashion. I mean, there's so many ways from a human capital, financial capital, and social capital perspective that what happens in New York City doesn't stay in New York City, but very much spills out to the entire country and very much across the world. I think you're going to see massive exoduses of businesses, of capital, of human beings. There were already indications that some of these suburban counties around New York City, for instance, Nassau County, which is the first county in Long Island, just east of Queens, in Nassau County, real estate prices have actually already begun to spike due to people fleeing the incoming zopocalypse, so to speak. Certainly in Florida, where I live, there are a lot of prospective first-time home purchasers, such as myself, who are very much already thinking about what it's going to mean for our housing market here in Florida. I think you're going to be looking at potentially iconic New York institutions. I mean, major banks, major media companies, major fashion outlets, who potentially might actually have to move out if this guy is capable of doing and able to execute half of his wild radical agenda. The silver lining is that there are real potential stops in place when it comes to the New York City Council, when it comes to Governor Hochul, when it comes to the legislature in Albany there. We will see if any of those stops actually end up happening and preventing his radical takeover agenda.
I don't know Josh's position on his radio show, but I'm not going to say that he's MAGA or conservative, but I will say that I'm a huge free market guy. I do believe in a lot of government intervention in certain areas. I just think you have to recognize that there's an impact when the government intervenes on things. That being said, I find the complaints about socialism in New York City to be entirely hollow when all of these same conservatives, maybe not Josh, when all of these other same conservatives seem to be clapping for Donald Trump taking like the US government equity stake in Intel at 10%, or the US government having a golden share in US Steel, Nippon Steel in that merger. The idea that sometimes socialism is okay when I guess the Republicans are doing it is very strange to me. And I feel like they were completely and utterly silent when it came to that. But the mayor of New York City having positions on things is somehow a worse form of socialism. It's especially scary because on the left, one of my big criticisms of Zoran is I do think that he's really far left on a lot of economic policy, but liberals and people on the left tend to follow the laws and the restrictions in place. So I'm not really worried about him doing some crazy takeover. Whereas on the right, there's just an absolute and utter disregard for rule of law, rule by law, and they will do whatever they can in whatever corrupt measure to enforce whatever kind of will they have. And I would say that Trump's 10% equity stake in Intel, the US government stake in Intel, and then the US government golden share in US Steel, those are incredibly crazy anti-capitalist, socialist-ish kind of deals.
Amani, are we about to see a flee of people from New York City?
I think it's really funny that whenever we have policies that put the American people first, suddenly there's this scramble, this fear of, oh my God, we're losing the country. New York City is falling, Out of all of the cultural capitals that Josh rattled off just now, he forgot a really major one, which is that New York City is also a diplomatic capital in the world, right? It's the base of the UN headquarters of the United Nations. So Zohran does have a very influential position as the mayor of New York City. And what we're seeing right now really is the emergence of class divide, right? I think the fact that Trump endorsed Cuomo, MAGA endorsed Cuomo, a Democrat, tells you everything you need to know about where people like Cuomo, people like Josh Hammer fall on the side of that class divide and who they're really fighting for. Actually, in fact, I think Josh isn't even looking at that class divide from the perspective of the American people. He's really looking at it through the perspective of what's best for Israel. That's the only way that Josh really looks at American policies.
There's one person on the show who is literally talking nonstop about the Middle East, and it's not me. I'm talking about the issues that actually matter to the median New Yorker. I'm talking about the economy, NYPD crime.
Because
you're taking every single conversation back to your bespoke, besotted, infatuated,
you want to ignore the elephant in the room.
Something that has no relevance whatsoever to the median New Yorker. You have the audacity. You have the audacity to say that I am the one obsessed. You are the one who won't shut up about it. So
we can talk over each other all day. Excuse me, Josh, anyone can do a preliminary Google search of everything that you've been saying about Zohran Mamdani over the past several months. And they've entirely revolved around your fixation on what's best for Israel. And the fact that Zohran said that he would arrest a war criminal like Netanyahu, who has an active arrest warrant out for him, yes, that did tremendously work in his favor. It actually was one of his most popular talking points.
Live
because
in
New York City is a diplomatic capital in the world. And we just had a UN General Assembly.
Okay, we're going to let Josh respond because then we need to move on to our next segment. So
is this normal to talk over? No, I'm sorry. I find it quite just telling that Josh has no problem speaking over the only woman on the panel. You can't let me finish a sentence. And I don't know if it's because of the lack of respect or your inability to actually answer to the points that
you've made against him, so that we can move on to our next
I didn't complete my points, but go ahead.
Okay, we can come back to them. Josh, we need to keep moving on. Respond to the points that Amani has made, and then we're going to move on to a Republican focus.
Well, she really didn't make any points. But, I mean, the notion that Mamdani's vow to arrest Bibi Netanyahu due to the ICC had any impact, move the needle in this
tremendously popular,
preposterous. And that is something that she finds, I guess, in her WhatsApp chats, in her blue-checked online YouTube, Twitter, circle, whatever there. The notion that there was any New Yorker outside of the hardcore base of the DSA that was voting on the issue as to whether or not Netanyahu will be arrested for landing at JFK Airport is nuts. They were voting primarily on
you're from Florida. What in the world do you know about what New Yorkers want?
We need to keep moving on.
They were voting on inflation.
I'm really sorry, but you didn't ask him to stop and let me finish when he was interrupting me, so I think that I should be able to.
Matter, not this individual panelists on this show's bespoke foreign policy issue that has no relevance to the day-to-day New York.
Okay, I'm going to move us
like
on.
Like a random man from Florida that wants
to box of nuclear weapons to Jerusalem, and he needs to say, okay, Israelis, Palestinians, negotiate peace. Whoever comes closer to actually reaching, is willing to get more concessions. If the other side doesn't and they can't reach a deal, they give the other side the nukes and they blow them up. Okay, because I cannot wait until we stop talking about Israel-Palestine in my goddamn country. Okay, so the mayoral election of New York City. Who cares? You can't even enact ICC warrants. Even the United States can't. We're not even Rome Statute signatories. Who cares about the friggin' Israel-Palestine? It's a New York City mayoral election.
Weren't you?
Okay. We need to keep moving this on. We cannot get bogged down into an Israel-Palestine debate. Amani, I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we need to keep going on.
They're putting their phones away before they commit them.
We need to keep moving on, Amani. So I'm going to move us on.
Israeli news cycle just for that piece of advice. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm going to keep us moving on to focus specifically on the implications of this election because it's a local race, but it's a local race for control of one city. An important city, no doubt, but a mayoral race nonetheless. However, it is the first general vote since President Trump retook the White House, so it is symbolic in value. That can't be denied. We saw Democratic governor wins in Virginia and New Jersey. Gavin Newsom's redistricting proposal got through in Victoria. So it has led a lot of people to say that this was and always was going to be a litmus test for the Republican Party. Stephen, I'm going to bring you in here first. Was this a referendum on President Trump as much as it was about local politics?
I hope so. I think that for the first time, we're finally seeing, especially through Gavin Newsom, like Democrats putting forth a positive position. It's not just attacking the right. It's not just standing in opposition to some of the insane stuff that Trump is doing, which they should be, but it's having actual figures for us to rally around. I just think contrasting the behavior of Gavin Newsom to Greg Abbott and the way that Congress basically passed, by decree to Abbott, hey, you can go and mess up all your districts now. And then, they just on their state assembly, they're like, oh, okay, we're just going to go ahead and redistrict everything. For Newsom to go, that's not okay. We don't accept that. We're going to do it here in California, and we're going to do it via a public referendum to our own citizens that initially started off as unpopular because the initial thing when that was floated was like, I don't know if the Democrats can do the redistricting, for California. It's built into the Constitution. They're going to have to pass a referendum, and that's not very popular right now. And to carry that through to fruition and then to see nationwide in Virginia, we see Democrats are winning, moderate Democrats are winning, sometimes up big. That's good. We saw Mamdani win in New York, despite Trump trying to, support Cuomo. Yeah, I think it's good for Democrats. I hope it's, pointing good towards the midterms for us, assuming Donald Trump lets us hold those elections in a free and fair manner.
Amani, was this a litmus test for Trump and for MAGA popularity?
I think it was a tremendous litmus test. It shows truly that, MAGA is doubling down on the racism and the bigotry and the white supremacy, quite frankly. And it is going to be a reckoning for the Democratic Party. I think Zohran's race has proven that if the Democrats don't catch up, they're going to keep losing seats and the party itself is going to be left behind. If there is going to be that reckoning, if there is going to be a pendulum swing, back to sanity in this country, it's not going to come from the Democratic Party. That's not where our salvation is going to be. It's going to be coming from the people. The people are going to be organizing. The people are going to be protesting more. They're going to be taking to the streets more. And especially if the economy keeps going down the way that it is right now, it's going to get I think it's going to force the hand of a lot of our leaders to actually own up to a lot of their policy decisions and answer to the demands that the people are making.
Josh, is this going to reverberate to the White House? Is this a commentary on how the president has run his first year back in office?
I think it's impossible to avoid that conclusion to an extent. The emphasis should be on to an extent. We're talking here about a mayoral election, albeit an extremely important one, and then a couple of gubernatorial elections in light blue states, New Jersey and Virginia, albeit the margin in all three of those races, the mayoral race and the two gubernatorial elections, those margins were all higher than the polls predicted, certainly higher than I predicted as well. So on the one hand, I would be cautious of overly interpreting and overly extrapolating. But yes, I think it is certainly fair to an extent to conclude that Republicans have some work to do. I mean, not just the Trump administration, but Republicans in general there. Because take us back to our earlier conversation. Again, it is my thesis that the reason that Zoran Mamdani won this election, in addition to being the Democratic candidate in a very Democrat city, is that he did, contrary to one of my co-panelists' assertions, he did emphasize to the, not the exclusion, but over above any other issue, he emphasized economic issues. Again, I think his stances on those issues are nuts, but he talked over and over again on his various economic policies and proposals there. And I think that it is incumbent on Republicans to realize that, unfortunately, the Republican Party, which is in the midst of kind of this generational rebrand, presenting itself as more of a middle and working class party, a rebrand that I have personally very much encouraged. I've written thousands of words on this about various policies and this and that there, but they are still viewed, I think, by many of the American people as still being the party of the upper class. And Democrats still have this kind of vestigial cachet when it comes to being the party of the proverbial little guy. And Republicans have a lot of work to do when it comes to building trust, when it comes to fighting inflation, boosting wages, reshoring jobs, things like that. So those are all the various bread and butter issues that I hope the Republicans are able to double down on in the year ahead until the November 2026 midterms.
Amani, President Trump threatened to withhold additional federal funds to New York other than the very minimum required if Mamdani was to win. Is that an abuse of power, and is that going to play exactly into Mamdani's playbook of standing up to power?
Power grab, Donald Trump has been holding federal funding hostage from states to politicize the reason why he's providing funding that they are entitled to. And so it comes as no surprise to anybody, but I will say that I was there last night at Zohran's victory party when the results came in. And during his victory speech, when he said to Trump, turn the volume up louder, the entire room went into a roar. And you know that this is the precipice of a MAGA showdown. And the people are ready for it. I don't think that New York is intimidated by any threats from Donald Trump whatsoever. If anything, they're going to hold down the fort and really lead by example for the rest of the country of what it looks like when we really fight for our rights.
Josh, if President Trump does stick to what he says there, is that going to backfire on the Republicans? Is that just going to be seen as exactly what Mamdani is trying to fight against?
Is what going to backfire exactly?
If he withholds federal funding from New York purely because the candidate that he doesn't like won the election.
Well, that's not why he would withhold federal funds. I mean, to be clear, if that is the literal stipulated reason, then yes, he would deserve backlash, and I'm sure that backlash would happen. But when presidents, including this president, talk about the possibility of withholding federal funds when it comes to DOJ grants, there typically those funds are done because those funds come with strings attached to them, and there are various things that local departments can't do. So I mean, not to go full legal nerd, but there's actually a whole body of constitutional precedent on this. There's a 1987 case called South Dakota versus Dole, which really elaborates on the exact nexus.
But all that aside, he did say, I'm not going to send good money after bad. I'm not going to give them any more than the minimum if Mamdani wins. He said it. He's not saying, I'm going to wait and see how he spends the money.
Yeah, this is typical Trumpian rhetorical flourish. This is how the man communicates, both in real life and on his Truth Social feed. And then it's up to Attorney General Pam Bondi and the various lawyers to actually put that into constitutionally permissible legal practice. So, for instance, if you're talking about DOJ grants to local police departments, it would be constitutional under the South Dakota versus Dole precedent and other precedents. It would be constitutional to withhold DOJ grants for local police departments if those local police departments do not do anything to assist ICE, immigration enforcement operations, or things like that. All of that is perfectly constitutional, and that, I think, would be the way to actually translate that Trumpian impulse into practice.
Mamdani's also...
I'd like to jump in here.
Just to be clear on that, this is not an ordinary state of affairs. There's no other president that has ever played games with, especially FEMA funds in the way that Trump has, and there is absolutely no legal permissibility for Trump to do the things that he does. I don't know where this idea comes from, that these are just Trump rhetorical flourishes. I think you could have gotten away with that in Trump term 1, but Trump has enacted through multiple ways, playing illegal games with FEMA funds and doing illegal things as president of the United States. The idea that it's Pam Bondi's job to put these into legally permissible actions is a joke. The administration, is fighting more legal battles in their first year than some presidents have fought in the entire 4 years or 8 years that they've been president.
A lot of those
Donald
were started
Trump's
by
issued,
the
I think,
insurrection. But
more started by what?
By rogue lower court judges. I mean, Jeb Boasberg in D.C., Judge McConnell in Massachusetts. I mean, depends on
those
the issue. I'm not sure
what country you're from. I'm from the United States of America, and those are federally appointed judges. You don't get to call them a rogue judge.
I'm actually
a ruling you don't like.
And
what you do is you appeal.
I know what I'm talking about here.
Oh, then in that case, then you know better, and you shouldn't.
If I can jump in and just simplify this,
administration. And I just want to be clear, Biden, no other
basic terms,
one at a time. Amani, hold that
bigger picture.
Destiny, Stephen, finish your point there. I'm going to hand it to Amani. Finish your point there, Stephen.
Trump did not say, I'm going to pull the strings on funding to New York City if they are using funds in ways which are impermissible based on current guidelines of the DOJ. Trump said that he didn't want to allow funds to New York City in an attempt to threaten or blackmail voters into making them think they're not going to get federal funds if they elect a mayor that he doesn't like. The idea that you might find some way pretextually, that's a word you might like as a lawyer, that you might find some way pretextually to justify some weird contingency on your funds or to withhold them as a result doesn't matter.
Year is 2025
because that's what
still
influences
taking
how
Donald
people
Trump's
vote.
social statements literally. I find that utterly astonishing. You should have learned literally a decade ago. It's not to take what he says.
Well, Trump is literally putting law firms and literally putting lawyers in executive orders, and he literally ordered Pam Bondi to begin to politically prosecute his opponents, and now this is literally showing up in indictments that are literally going in front of federal judges. So it seems like it's actually happening.
That was actually what Merrick Garland and Jack Smith did to Donald Trump himself, as well as a very slew of others. People like Steve Bannon, who literally went to jail because of that very notion there. So if there's one
except that's actually not even remotely the case.
Literal prosecution of political opponents is actually the
so you either lied when you said you were a lawyer, or you're just carrying water for the administration. You will never find a statement by Joe Biden that is the equivalent to Joe Biden telling Merrick Garland, "Hey, can you prosecute my political opponents?" Because those statements don't exist. Donald Trump puts them on Truth Social. He named Letitia James, he named James Comey, and he named Bolton, and he named the prosecutor that he wanted to prosecute them. And all three of these people are now mysteriously indicted. To compare that to Joe Biden, who presided over a presidency where
the Attorney General and DOJ
was appointed to investigate his own documents case is absolutely absurd. You're living a fantastic delusional land to even try to draw the equivalent there.
Okay, Amani, I'm going to bring you in, give us your point of view, and then I'm going to move us on to a Democratic focus.
Listen, at the end of the day, to make it as clear as possible, the bigger picture here is that, yes, Donald Trump is gutting the American Constitution. He's been doing this since the very start of his presidency. In fact, he's been serving as president to foreign countries more than the American public. He has violated so many of our constitutional rights. He's speaking about removing term limits from the presidency so that he can literally become a tyrant over us. So the fact that he's threatening to withhold funding because he doesn't like the mayor that a city has elected, this is not a surprise. And he has done this already. Josh, I'm sure you will hate to be reminded of the fact that Donald Trump actually restricted federal funding and completely gutted the jewel of the American academic system, which is our Ivy League schools, in order to censor criticism of our foreign ally, Israel. Donald Trump is sacrificing American rights.
Out of 1964.
And
he's really enforcing Title VI, which we can discuss if you really want to go.
For outside influences. And this is a litmus test of where the people stand, more than the Republican Party or the Democrats. It's a litmus test of what the people are demanding. Josh, I know that this is the bane of your existence because you care more about Israel's interest than anything else, and everything that I'm saying undermines that.
Josh, let Amani finish, and then I'm going to bring you back in.
Yeah, because it's the center. It's the center of everything right now. Hello, newsflash.
It is not.
We exist.
I live in the United States. Where do you live?
Genocide is happening.
I'm focused on American issues.
Josh, just let Amani finish. I'm going to bring you back in.
There is nothing more important or prominent than that. You keep talking over me because you don't want people to hear the truth. Our tax money is being used predominantly to fund the extermination of a people on the other side of the world. And it's being done by
Amani,
the country that you are positioning as above the interests of the American people. That's what's happening here. And yes,
Amani,
it is the most important point of our current political system.
Okay, I'm going to move us on there. Josh, a quick response from you to give you the right of reply, and then I'm going to refocus again back specifically on this mayoral election campaign and what it means for the Democrats.
The right of reply. He has the right to defend himself. Go ahead. You've had way more.
Amani, please just let Josh.
Go ahead with your other talking points.
Josh has the right to respond to your comments. Josh, go ahead.
Talking points are really stupid.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you have not stopped Josh from speaking over me.
I have indeed.
He's interrupted me in responding, but
we're giving everyone fair time. We're giving everyone fair time, Amani. So just a moment. Let's let Josh respond.
But go ahead, Josh. Let's pat Josh on the head. Go ahead and share your opinion.
But we on Counterpoints give everyone the right to speak, so we need to get Josh's response to your comments.
We know he needs the right to defend himself. Go ahead.
Everyone deserves it. Josh, go ahead.
Okay, very briefly. Donald Trump's righteous crusade against America's higher education establishment is primarily about rooting DEI, is primarily about rooting diversity, equity, inclusion programs.
You're calling
The
it
post-constitutional
a
vestiges
crusade?
of the Harvard versus Students for Fair Admissions case
Oh
in the Supreme
my
Court in
God.
2023. This is the executive order that he signed back in January. They interpreted DEI programs, which are overtly racist insofar as they are anti-white. They are also anti-Christian, anti-Mormon, and yes, anti-Jewish. These policies are contrary to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They are also unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment in light of the Harvard affirmative action case of the Supreme Court 2 years ago. That is what Donald Trump is enforcing. Those are the lawsuits. Those are the high-profile settlements. That is the Columbia University case, the Princeton Harvard cases. That's what he is doing there. It is not about serving a foreign government's interest in the minds or the eyes of my patently obsessed co-panels and interlocutors. It's about enforcing this nation's civil rights laws.
Okay, all right. I need to keep us moving on because we are really running short on time and we have a whole segment on Democrats that we need to get through. So much of what is being read into Mamdani's victory is not least that it signals this new path out of the political woods for the Democrats, which is what, Amani, you were pointing to at the very beginning of our discussion. The party has been struggling since that embarrassing loss in last year's presidential race, and it sank to historical lows in favourability polls this year. But just how galvanizing can this victory be when you have senior Democrats, like the senior Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, didn't even endorse Mamdani and still won't say if he even voted for him on Tuesday, and House Leader Hakeem Jeffries withheld support until the day before early voting started. So, Stephen, does Mamdani's victory further highlight the party's internal identity crisis?
No, like I said, everybody's over-indexing on this guy in whatever way is politically suitable to them. People on the far left look at Mamdani as some referendum on the party. The reality is that over the past 12 years, ever since the Justice Dems appeared, ultra progressives or, these Marxist, Leninist, tanky, whatever socialist people keep thinking there's going to be some huge uprising with socialist, ultra progressive, ultra left, whatever candidates winning. And they don't. They keep losing over and over and over and over again. Now that they have Mamdani, they're like, oh my God, this is what we've been waiting for 12 years. New York City is a very blue city. Mamdani is not very popular amongst the entire Democratic Party. For all the criticisms I have of Schumer and Jeffries, I understand them not endorsing him necessarily. I don't know why we would necessarily look to senators or congressmen to endorse mayoral candidates in New York City. I don't even know how appropriate that is or historically what the precedence is for that. Like, it makes sense that they wouldn't. Mamdani won his election. I'm glad that he did. Again, he's to the left of me, but if you're in New York City, I would probably support the Democratic candidate over any conservative one, especially when the conservatives have tried to use blackmail from the DOJ to control the mayor of New York City. So yeah, I think that you saw a lot of Democrats winning yesterday in very moderate ways, in which the far left was predicting, that the Virginia races wouldn't go the way we wanted them to. And we won even the attorney general seat there, despite the text messaging and everything with Jones. And, we won in New Jersey, and you don't need this far left movement across the entirety of the United States to win in all these elections just because a pretty far left guy won in New York City.
Is it unique to New York City, Amani? Is this the start of more far left success across the country, or are we seeing a more divided Democratic Party than ever?
I think the Democratic Party has remained divided right now. I think that's pretty obvious by the slow pace that we've seen a lot of Democratic leadership show when it comes to support behind Zohran. And that divide is very palpable because what it is saying is that so many of our Democratic leaders are paid for and bought for interests that are contrary to their very own constituents. People are capable of organizing against the policies that are negatively impacting them. And I truly hope that this does inspire more of that organizing across the board. Like I said, if we see that change happen, if we see that watershed moment, it's not voluntarily going to come from Democratic leadership. It's not going to come from the party itself. It's going to be coming from the people forcing the leaders they want to see into those seats. Because as it stands, also the Democratic Party has a lot of red tape. The establishment has a lot of red tape in order to make it very difficult to disrupt the status quo, to rock the boat for incumbents that have held on to their seats for entire lifetimes. I mean, the incumbent that I ran against for Congress has held on to a seat for longer than I've been alive. even though his interests are contrary to those of our constituents. So it just shows that if what they say about an immovable object, right? It has to be met with force if we're going to see that change happen.
Mm-hmm. Josh, is the media getting too swept up in the star power of one man? Has he single-handedly rejuvenated the left?
Well, single-handedly, I think is a very strong way of putting it, but this is definitely a massive boost. I mean, for Democrats in the first major elections in the first year of the Trump administration. Zoran Mamdani, for what I have been very critical of him, I disagree with him on virtually everything, but he's clearly a very talented politician. I mean, he's clearly a very smooth talking guy. He's a good looking man. He presents very well. He seems amicable and jovial. I mean he's clearly a very skilled politician. I think a lot of folks have made the analogy to Barack Obama on the campaign trail back in 2008, the whole hope and change thing, and this is going to be this is obviously the test for Democrats. I mean, after Kamala Harris got shellacked in the 2024 presidential election, losing all 7 swing states, it seemed to a lot of folks that the path to relevance for the Democrats was to shift at least a little bit towards the center. And you actually saw some inklings of that earlier this year we mentioned Gavin Newsom earlier. I mean, even Gavin Newsom on that conversation with my late friend Charlie Kirk, Gavin Newsom in that conversation with Charlie actually talked about how Democrats have gone too far on the transgender issue, biological males and women's sports, so forth. So there actually were some inklings that Democrats were thinking of moderating on some of these cultural issues. And then we got the election of Mamdani in New York City, and that just throws a massive fork into the wrench, so to speak. So it is a big conversation for Democrats. It's obviously an ideological kind of, injection straight into the veins of the far left flank of the Democratic Party. And that's only going to, I think, prolong and exacerbate their kind of internecine civil war that's happening on the left, because it really does slow down the forces of moderation. No doubt about that.
Mm. Amani, we saw 2 moderate governor candidates win their elections. So could there be a bit of a risk of saying, well, look, moderate Democrats are still providing what the party needs. Maybe this is just a New York blip, and the moderate Democrats are going to be the ones that forge ahead from here?
Anything, I think that
was that to
Kamala's presidential race.
Sorry, Amani, go ahead.
I think that Kamala's presidential race, right? I think that Kamala losing as badly as she did was a referendum of that fact, right? It is a losing strategy for the Democrats to try to give more of the same and push more towards the right in order to try to appeal to voters. It makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't reflect the polls. It doesn't reflect the interest. It doesn't reflect the outspoken opinions of the people that they're representing. If anything, it is this push that we're seeing Zohran lead the way on, which is going further to the left, further into progressivism that the people are yearning for. Because right now, both of the parties have been looking identical for a very long time. For many election cycles, we've been asked to choose the lesser of 2 evils. And I think the American people are sick of that. We don't want to keep voting for the lesser of 2 evils. We want to vote for something good. And in order to put something good in front of people, you have to shift into something different. So right now, a lot of Democratic leaders, a lot of Republican representatives, they serve the same masters. They serve the same corporate interests. They serve the same donors. And for that reason, they sound exactly the same. And I think that's what's been so refreshing about Zohran, is he's saying, like, no, we can break out of that. We don't have to be molded by the system. We can rebuild the system.
Stephen, that's all well and good, but if he doesn't deliver, if we put him up on this pedestal, could that backfire then, and it will work against all Democrats?
No, I mean, on a personal selfish level, like if he goes up as mayor and if he fails on some things, then I can point to that and I can say, well, look, far left policies don't work. We should focus more on our strong center left policies and keep pushing that, because we know these work. And if it does work, then I change my mind on some things, like, oh, maybe the government can intervene more in some local matters. Maybe rent control isn't as horrible as I thought it was. Maybe there are places for the government to compete when it comes to things like grocery stores or whatever. Again, he's the mayor of New York City. He's not the governor of New York State. He's certainly not the president. He doesn't hold like a federal office. The idea that the entire Democratic Party, is going to shoulder itself on Zoran Mamdani's success in New York City, I just think is a bit ridiculous. Yeah.
Josh, what do you think? Do you think there could be a risk that the Democrats could get swept up in this? We're going to see them move. I mean, the Republicans got quite swept up with President Trump and his personality. They've moved in that direction. Are we going to see the same things? Could the Democrats learn that lesson now?
Look, the United States is a very large country, and the brand of Democratic Party politics that leads to electoral success in the year 2025 in blue bastions like New York City, Chicago, and so forth is not necessarily the kind of Democratic Party brand that will lead to success in any number of other cities and states across America. So yes, there absolutely is, I think, a huge concern. I mean, far be it from me to advise Democrats. I wish them, politically speaking, nothing but the worst, of course. But if I were hypothetically advising the Democrats, it would seem to me that there would be a real risk of trying to export the radical far left politics of Zoran Mamdani and the DSA more broadly, and then trying to inject that into the candidates for governor in swing states like Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina, or frankly, even for mayoral positions in swingy cities in some red states. I'm thinking like a Dallas, Texas, a place like that there. I don't think Zoran Mamdani's politics would fly in a place like a Dallas, Texas, for instance. I mean, Kansas City, Missouri. I mean, it's very hard to say, but I think that there absolutely is a huge risk of trying then to say, okay, this did work in the nation's largest city, and then saying, okay, it's going to work from sea to shining sea. On the other hand, again, I do think that it is definitely a bit of an injection, a shot in the arm of the far left DSA flank of the party. It's only going to, I think, exacerbate internal divides, which is at least something of a silver lining for Republicans who otherwise wake up the day after the election and are in something of a daze.
Amani, can it be transported into other parts of America? I mean, Josh questions whether somewhere like Texas would embrace the politics of Zoran Mamdani.
There are communities that believe in and support the politics of Zohran Mamdani all over the country. Whether or not they're a majority in different parts of the country is a different story, but certainly, the ideals that he espouses are popular for a reason. They aren't out of nowhere. And I think that the most dangerous part of his success is that he has shown that those policies can work. We can break out of that mold and we can present the American people with something different than what's been done. And obviously that is bad news, for our billionaires and for, people that are directly benefiting from that power grab. But for him, he's kind of really disrupting that and breaking the wheel, so to speak, or showing at least that there's hope that it can be broken. And I think that that's going to inspire a lot of movement in different types of communities across the country. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's promised big. He has a lot to deliver. We're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. But I thank all of you for your contribution. Josh Hammer, Senior Editor-at-Large of Newsweek and the host of The Josh Hammer Show. Stephen Bonnell, a YouTuber, political commentator known online as Destiny. And Amani Al-Khatahtbeh, author, activist, and founder of MuslimGirl.com. Thank you to all of you for being here on Counterpoints. And thank you to you for tuning in to this episode of Counterpoints. Keep up to date with our latest debates and, of course, our special interviews. You can subscribe to Al-Arabiya English on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on X and TikTok. I'll see you next time.